to the club. All right. All right. Okay, friends. Welcome to Ann Arbor Real Estate Investors Club. Today's session is Foreclosures 101. As I mentioned a couple minutes ago before everybody jumped on, today's session is mostly going through the process of buying a foreclosure. I'm going to share some of my experiences because I've done this for a long time. There have been waves, which I'll go through, and there used to be a lot of them a long time ago, but they're still out there, and there's still opportunities for investors. And as an investor, whether or not you actually ever buy a foreclosure property, it you should know the process, and you should be familiar with the process, and some of the pitfalls and caveats, and I'll kind of help you hopefully avoid some of those. There's a particular tip that I have, a negotiating strategy, if you will, for bank-owned properties that has took me a long time to learn and hone, but it does work pretty well. I mean, not in every situation, but in many situations. So this is one of my disclaimers, but I don't do this to scare people out or away of the real estate investing business. But I just put it up here as a reminder, to myself and to you guys that real estate, it's not as simple or is not as easy as some self-proclaimed gurus might tell you, or the average person might think from looking at HGTV shows. It's a difficult business, and it's not a matter of if you'll have setbacks. It's when you will have setbacks and how bad they are. And I was thinking about what am I going to say for this slide again this morning, and at the bottom line at the end of the day is that your why for doing the business and being in the real estate business has got to be stronger than any setback that you will have, because I've been in this business, I'm going on 22 years. Realtors, real estate agents, it's relatively easy to get in the business, but a lot of people come and go. Real estate investors, a lot of people come and go. Unfortunately, a lot of people go after they lose a lot of money, and they learn the hard way. I'm here to kind of help brace you a little bit and to let you know that, by engaging with this group, you have a support team to help you, weather those potholes and those setbacks. So this is kind of as much of a little life lesson as it is a real estate lesson. But don't come into real estate think the grass is greener and it's easier than, it's got to be easier than what I'm going through right now in my business, or whatever you might be going through in your life right now. It's going to be a different set of challenges, but they're going to be there. All right. Let Adam in here, and I'm going to go here. For those of you who this might be your first call today, your first Zoom call, your first Ann Arbor Real Estate Investors Club meeting, what we're about is what I call the trifecta: learning, networking, deal making. These are things that I think that every person in the real estate business should be doing every day. Learn something new, learn one thing every day. Your network can never be too big or too strong. I run a networking group. I do networking through this group. And I just joined a third group yesterday. I just joined another networking group that it's a different group with a different vibe, but it's different people.
What?
And you have to
That's
meet different people
no.
every day. If you could
You're
mute
fine.
yourself, I'd appreciate it today. But networking is really, really, it's key. It's key to success in this business. And then obviously deal making. Every real estate investor who is in this business is on the hunt for his or her next deal, every day. Every day you're in the business. So that's what we're about. That's what we focus on. And that's what I try to condense down in my meetings and in my classes. All right. Now, a lot of people come to real estate investing and come to this group. They don't know anything about investing. And not only do they not know anything, they don't know what they don't know. So what you need to know are the fundamentals. And you get the fundamentals down, and the level of everything you do will rise. This is a quote from Michael Jordan, which hopefully everybody on this call knows who he is. But it's a great quote that I use, and it holds true, because when you learn about the business and you learn the fundamentals and you build off the fundamentals, it goes without saying, it builds your confidence, builds your knowledge, so you know how to handle these curveballs when they come down the pipe. So fundamentals. So this is my list of fundamentals. Again, this is my recipe based on my 20 plus years experience, that these are the subjects that I consider the fundamentals that you need to know. And there's no graduation certificate that you know everything about analysis and therefore you don't need to learn anymore. All of these fundamentals, I still learn something new every day, or I try to learn something new every day. Often I learn it still the hard way, but these are the fundamentals. So foreclosures is one of the fundamentals. That's the subject of today's session. When I do these Saturday laser classes, it's focused on one of these fundamentals. So just that's for your knowledge and for your future knowledge as you see me post and host upcoming events, which I'm putting together the schedule for 2026 already, which I can't believe. It's going to revolve around these fundamental topics. And these are subjects that, I've taught over the years. Each time I teach it, I think I learn a little bit more and get a little bit better. So 2026 will be a little bit better than 2025 and on like that. And you should think of yourself and your business the same way. All right, today's objectives. As I mentioned, a lot of you jumped on the call after I had started. It's an overview of the process of buying a foreclosure. All right. I put together an 11-step action plan, I call it, of, kind of a systematic and sequential list of items that are typically a part of every transaction that you need to be aware of and prepare for, before it happens. That's another thing I like to do with my classes, is prepare you for scenarios that will happen, rather than you get in and involved in something and something happens and you had no idea where this came from. All right. We're going to take a brief look at the list. I'm not going to look at the whole list today, but I'm going to talk about the list of, there's over 200 foreclosures currently on the market right now in my multiple list service. I'm going to take a peek at one in Washtenaw County that came on the market yesterday, which will give you an example. I'll walk you through an example. So when you see properties, whether you find them on Zillow or Realtor or Trulia or wherever you find them, you'll kind of know, kind of in general, about the market. I'm going to do specifically Washtenaw County because that's the one I'm most familiar with. Also, some next steps. So I'm going to invite you to, I'm going to take a sip of coffee, take some notes. I will have a cheat sheet at the end. I'm going to have a recording of this session. I'm going to put it on my YouTube channel so you can review it if you want. But today's pretty basic stuff, but just a quick overview of the foreclosure process. And I'm going to encourage you, if you have a question, put it in the chat, and, there's a good chance I may answer it in the next couple slides, but I'll answer it at the end. but I please don't ask me any questions about buying at sheriff sales and all of those kind of things. Okay, I don't really teach that. That's more of an advanced topic, and there's lots of other resources out there that do that. And my classes are more kind of for people who are new to real estate investing and new to the buying process. And I encourage you to not think about purchasing properties at a sheriff's sale until you've got a couple other deals under your belt, at least a couple other deals. So don't ask me about sheriff sales, all right, today. This is how it works. If you whomever everybody who has a mortgage, if you are 30 days late, uh, on day 31, you're going to get a text or a phone call or an email or a snail mail from your mortgage lender saying, hey, you're 31 days late. All right. So when you're 31 days late, you're considered delinquent on your mortgage. Okay. And then when if you don't engage in a conversation with your mortgage lender about why it's late, all right, the clock is going to tick. 90 days. On day 91, you are considered delinquent and your property is considered in pre-foreclosure. And there's a pretty good chance that your property will end up on some public list somewhere, that you are in pre-foreclosure. All right. And I've seen this happen over the years, and now, this works like clockwork because of technology. All right. It used to be the banks would have to do this stuff by hand, and you can imagine the backlog and the time it takes to do, and it's something they don't like doing anyway. And it's something at the bank that's usually assigned to the newest employee of the bank. So anyway, that's how it works. So between 90 and 180 days, all right, it's called pre-foreclosure. So at 180 days, the property is going to go to a sheriff's sale. So what I won't call them the most savvy, but the most experienced investors do who work in this space, what they do is they get those pre-foreclosure lists every day or every week or whatever, and then they reach out to these owners to to offer to buy the property, to take the property out of foreclosure. So that's a whole thing in and of itself. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the wholesaling class, which is in a few weeks. But that's what the most savvy wholesalers and real estate investors do. I shouldn't say savvy. It's people who have decided to work in this space of the wholesaling space. They go after the pre-foreclosures. It's a very tedious process. Again, that's for the next session. So now so it's gone to sheriff's sale. Typically at the sheriff's sale, the buyer of the property, or who puts the claim on it, is the mortgage company or the bank. All right, because they have the vested interest in the property. Um, Other times there are investors who will make bids at sheriff sales, but again, that's an advanced topic. But it just for today's purposes, suffice it to say that the bank that holds the mortgage on the property is the one who's going to get the deed or the right to the deed at the sheriff's sale. So at the sheriff's sale, that's 180 days. So that's 6 months from the last mortgage payment being made, basically. And so now you are in for the next 6 months. It's called the redemption period. And this is another reason why the average investor doesn't buy a property at the sheriff's sale, because you don't get the property at the sheriff's sale. If you go in and buy a property at a sheriff's sale, you still have to wait 6 months for the owner, because that owner has the opportunity to get right with the bank and make the property viable again and get caught up on their payments or negotiate a new mortgage or whatever it might be. So if you're an average investor and you buy a property at a sheriff's sale, you've still got to wait 6 months, and there's no guarantee you're going to get the property in 6 months. So you've got your money tied up for 6 months on a property you may or may not get. So what are you're not going to be sitting on your hands for the next 6 months because you're going to be out looking for other deals and you can't survive. That's not a viable way to survive in this business unless you're doing it on the scale of some of the people who do it. All right. So now we're a year, it's been a year since the last payment. And again, here's what we don't know. We don't know if the owner is in the property, not in the property, taking care of the property, not taking care of the property. We don't know any of that stuff. So we don't know what's going on. But at day 361, let's assume that the owner of the property did not redeem it. And therefore, the deed goes to the bank, and the bank is now the owner of the property. Okay. So now the bank is an entity, it's not a person. So the bank typically is likely not local. So the bank is not a person. So the bank doesn't know the condition of the property, number one. Number two, if they did know the condition of the property, they're not going to say they know the condition of the property. So none of the seller's disclosures are going to mean anything because it's going to say there's going to be a line through it's going to say bank owned. The banks are exempt from seller's disclosures because obviously the bank does not live in the property. So at day 361, the bank takes ownership of the property, and then the bank will hire a local real estate agent to put the property on the market. And as you study this and as you see this, and as you see the bank owned property listings in the multiple list service, that's why I'm talking about when I talk about there's 230 some properties in the multiple list service today. Okay. All of those properties are owned by banks and they're listed with a real estate agent. The bank has a contract with the listing agent. The listing agent has a contract. The bank pays the listing agent, and the bank may or may not agree to pay a buyer's agent, but we're a little bit off into the weeds. But they hire an agent, and it's listed on the open market. And that's basically the foreclosure process. So when you read about pre-foreclosures and this and that, I'm going to go after pre-foreclosures. Well, you can do that, but it is a different league. I'm telling you that it's not a league you want to get into when you're starting out, especially not only this process that you have to go through, but the market that we're in. It's not conducive to going down this road as a newer investor. It's good to know, as I said, I'm going to repeat myself here a little bit. It's good to know because opportunities do arise, and you can partner with other people who have done this before if an opportunity comes down the pike. But it's good for you to know this process. But I'm going to encourage you to not attempt doing it alone because this is something where you will get knocked on your butt and you will get frustrated, and it might cause you to quit the business because you get in so far over your head so quickly that your head is spinning. You don't know what hits you. That's all I can tell you about it. If you want to talk more about it, I'm willing to talk one-on-one and have coffee about it. And you can ask me why I think that or what experiences I have. I don't have to go through the whole litany of horror stories that I've gone through to make my point. And I don't have time to do that anyway. So Here's another concept I want you to learn today. And I've just defined it as the big myth. All right. And the myth is the way that foreclosure properties were handled prior to the year 2008, and then the way that foreclosures are handled. And when I say handled, handled by the banks who are the owners, the way it's been handled since 2008. So a lot of people, everything pre 2008, was a lot of time there. And post 2008, if you're coming into real estate and you don't know, and you talk to people who don't really know, this dividing line, um, then you will think that it's the way it was before, or other people that you talk to that haven't learned this yet, they just don't know, so they assume that foreclosures are foreclosures, it's handled the same way, blah blah blah. So the big myth is this: is pre 2008, the banks, it still reflects very badly on the banks, both as a PR issue as well as a financial issue, when a bank has a foreclosure, because a foreclosure on a bank, on their books, so to speak, is called a non-performing asset. Okay. And that means that the bank is holding an asset that is non-performing, meaning it's not making the bank money, meaning the bank is actually losing money on this asset. They don't like that. And they don't like people to know that they have that, because again, it reflects badly on the bank, and it does impact, their ability to borrow money and lend money, and there's a whole other situation around that. So prior to 2008, when the banks took possession of a property in the foreclosure process, all they were interested in was getting it off their books, okay, as quickly as possible, and as stealthily as possible. So what they would do is they would sell the property at just the amount that was owed to them, so they could break even and get it off the books and not screw around with it. So those were the glory days of foreclosures for investors, because you're buying the property at nowhere near what the property value is. You're buying it at just what it was owed to the lender. So it could be pennies on the dollar. But again, the purpose was for the banks, the sellers, just get it off their books, break even as quickly as possible. Okay, period. All right. 2008. What happened in 2008 is the market crashed, and it's like, Hoover Dam breaking. And there was just a tsunami of foreclosures that not only could the banks not keep up with it, but they couldn't keep up with it. They were all taking a bath and all going under. And I mean, some of you guys are probably too young to even remember the market crash, which blows my mind. But those of us who remember it, and those of us who went through it, know that that was it. So what it took them, I want to say 2008, at least everything was frozen for a couple of years. 2008, 2009, everything was just frozen. Now we're moving into 2010, 2011, and the banks are starting to get their arms around all of these non-performing assets that they own, and what are they going to do about it? And as they put stuff on the market, they would see that investors, who weathered the market, were willing to pay cash and were willing to pay more. There were multiple offers on these bank owned properties that were just put on the market for what people owed them. And then sooner or later, because the banks are slow on the uptick, sooner or later it dawns on the banks, well, wait a second, why don't we start putting these on the market at what the market will bear, rather than just what we're owed. So we can potentially make a profit on the sale that will help offset the losses that they suffered in, with all of the other properties that they took a bath on and went out of business on and had to be bailed out on. So that's the myth. So the myth is that the bank is selling the property just for what they're owed on, where today, in general, not in every case, and I'll talk a little bit about it when I talked about the case study, that the banks are putting these properties on the market in at or near or maybe just below what they believe the market value to be. So what does that mean for investors? It means that foreclosures are not the gold mine that they used to be for investors, but there are opportunities out there, but they're harder to find, and there's still competition for them, and all that stuff. But that's the reality of it. So the properties are out there. In many of the cases, again, it's going to be market specific, hyper local market specific, but kind of generally, I mean, I find this like in Washtenaw County, when foreclosures come on the market, sometimes they're put on above market, and I don't get it. But they some they ultimately end up selling, again, because the bank is a very, very highly motivated seller, because they want it off their books for multiple reasons. All right. Hopefully that makes sense to you and you kind of understand it now. And you can explain it to other people who might not know. So here's a step by step. I'm going to highlight a few of these steps. This is the sheet. I have this on my cheat sheet. I will encourage you to jot it down because I'm going to be on this slide for a few minutes. And jot down questions for yourself if you want to put something in the chat, or if you want to contact me later with questions. What did you mean about this? Or can you give me an example about that? Whatever. I'm more than happy to do that. But you guys you guys who have been in my classes before, is I kind of like to develop things, in a step-by-step manner, in a sequential manner as much as possible, and kind of a methodical approach to it. Because if you do things haphazard or out of sequence or out of order, you wind up spinning your wheels a lot of the time, and you wind up wasting a lot of time that you could have been doing something else. And take it from me, the older you get, the more precious time is. So you want to maximize your time and leverage your time. And I think you do that by developing that same attitude to your real estate business, a a plan, a systematic approach, kind of a sequential timeline, that makes sense, and a methodical approach, and following through on it. Because this, I mean, every area of real estate, but this is another area where you've got to follow the rules. You'll learn that when you say, well, banks do this or banks do that, if you don't know, everyone has a tendency to say, well, it's bank owned, therefore, it's all the same. Every bank handles it the same way. No, this is like HOAs. Every bank has their own rules, their own procedures, their own requirements, their own, penalties, whatever it is. Every bank there's a different wrinkle to it. You'll never know all that. You can mitigate it by, the more knowledge you have and the more time you go through it. You'll never know it all, but you can prepare as best you can. All right. Here's my 12 steps for going through the process of purchasing a foreclosure. If you've been in the real estate business, you don't have to have been in it as long as I have. if you've been in for any amount of time, you know things go fast, then they go slow, then they go fast again, then they go slow again. There's no rhyme or reason for it, but you need, by your knowledge and experience and the team that you assemble to do these deals, you've got to develop the ability to decide quickly. It's in any real estate transaction, but it is certainly a little bit more acute in the case of foreclosures because there's timelines and deadlines, and the frustrating thing that you will find out is, if you want or need some information from the bank, they'll take their sweet time getting it to you. But if the bank wants or needs some information from you, you've got to drop everything and get it to them instantaneously in a ridiculous, often ridiculous timeline. So if you're just kind of aware of that going in, it's a good thing to be aware of. But you need to have the ability to decide quickly. And especially a lot of these are multiple offer situations. A lot of these are, it's really submission of an online form, and you're facelessly negotiating behind a screen, filling out a form. So you can't really utilize, your usual negotiation skills as a buyer. And again, there's a whole set of moving parts that vary with each bank. But just know that, if you hesitate, you're dead. And if you're dead, you're going to get frustrated. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to want, and then you're going to want to self-doubt, and you're going to want to quit. So the only thing I can tell you about developing the ability to decide quickly, and this is also kind of a little bit of a life lesson, is if you have in your mind, you have in your mind your why, you have in your mind your plan, and you also have to have this. Yeah, I have to develop this as a real estate investor, that this is not the only deal out there, that if this deal doesn't go, there is something better out there. Okay. So many investors, especially newer investors, get hung up. You see dollar signs in your eyes and you say, well, I can't let this one get away. I'll never get another one, blah, 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 or they're so hard to come by. No, you take a deep breath. You say there's plenty of deals out there, but you have to have the ability to pull the trigger quickly. Again, this also it goes to developing your business, but it also very importantly develops your reputation as a real estate investor, because it's a big world and it's a small world. And if you develop the reputation as an investor that, yeah, you do what you say you're going to do, and you have the ability to pull the trigger quickly, guess what's going to happen is other people in the industry, you're going to attract deals if you develop that ability and you develop that reputation, that you're fair, you're not trying to screw anybody, you negotiate fairly, you do business fairly, and you decide quickly. you know Other realtors, wholesalers, lenders, other people in the business are going to want to gravitate towards you, and they will bring you deals, and that will be kind of a self-perpetuating development of your career. All right. Hire a good buyer's agent. There are like 1.5 million realtors in the country. All right. And I read a statistic where 75% of them, which is mind blowing to me, did not do a deal this year. 75% of realtors who are licensed didn't do one deal. So that's not only not selling foreclosures, but not doing one deal. All right. The foreclosure world, I will kind of call it a shark tank. It's a smaller pool, and it's people who do these regularly. When you see foreclosure listings, you'll see, I mean, not that many, maybe a half a dozen. There's a half a dozen realtors you'll see as a listing agent on a good bulk of these properties, at least the ones in Southeast Michigan that I see. All right. I have learned, I've done deals with them. So I make it a point, to be responsive, be cooperative, be a good buyer's agent to do a deal with. Okay. Because that's how it has worked for me, is, you attract more flies with honey than with vinegar. So you should hire a buyer's agent. I'm applying for the job, but if you don't want to work with me, I really encourage you to hire a buyer's agent to buy a foreclosure, but hire a buyer's agent who has experience doing foreclosures. All right. Ask them, find out about them. They don't have to specialize in it, because you can't necessarily live off of doing with foreclosures unless you're on the listing side. But you want to hire a buyer's agent. You don't want to, and you don't want to, and then you don't want to say what the typical average investor will say. Oh, well, I'll just work with the listing agent and I'll save that commission. Okay. Go ahead, do that. And, touch the stove. Okay. Go ahead. You say you want to touch the stove's not hot. Okay. The stove's not hot. You touch the stove. Guess what? The stove is hot. I told you the stove was hot. Oh, well, I didn't think the stove was hot. Okay. Hire a good buyer's agent. The buyer's agent is going to be your partner. You're really short-sighted, if you say, oh, I'm going to go to the listing agent, or I'm going to go with my cousin who has a license who, give me a kickback on his commission or whatever. What are you're talking about a couple grand typically, on these, because the banks typically don't pay a full commission to their agent or to a buyer's agent. Okay. So it's more lucrative for realtors on both sides to not do foreclosure deals for that reason. Okay. The bank can't stand, I'm going to go on my soapbox about banks, but it's really, they can't stand anybody making money on the deal except for them. Okay. I don't know. I mean, I do know why they do it that way, but that's how they do it. All right. Hire a good buyer's agent. You're going to need an attorney. And I'll tell you that that's maybe the next slide. I'll go into that a little bit more. You're going to have an attorney, on your team, on your speed dial, on your phone. Uh, I offer service through, it's called Legal Shield. That's a different thing. Maybe some of you know about it. I'm not going to go into it today because my clock is ticking. But if you're going to buy a foreclosure, don't dare do it without an attorney looking over the documents. And the documents are not the same as a traditional sale. All right. You're going to want to, okay, number 4 circles back to number 1. Okay. You can make decisions quickly if you want, or I won't say if, when you have the ability to figure out the ARV, which is the after repair value, and then figure out your MAO, which is an acronym for maximum allowable offer. All right. That's what we talk about in our analysis class, is these acronyms and these numbers, which are really the bookends of where you're going to negotiate a deal. All right. Um, have a good repair estimate knowledge, because again, most of the time you're flying blind. It's possible, but it's not, you should plan on the fact that you might have to make an offer on this property without physically putting eyes on it or physically walking through it. You're not going to necessarily be able to do that day one if you've never bought a property before, if you've never bought a foreclosure before. It's a really daunting prospect to attempt to buy one that you haven't seen at all. Okay. But this is what you're going to have to grow into as an investor, is developing the ability to estimate repairs without seeing the property. All right. Now that's tough. And you say, Brian, what the hell are you talking about? Well, that's the world that we live in. But that's the subject of my other fundamental classes. All right. Um, if you're going to write an offer, you can't submit an offer without what's called proof of funds, or if you're borrowing money from a lender, a an approval letter or pre-approval letter from a lender that has to go along with your offer, or the banks won't even look at your offer. All right. So what's proof of funds? Proof of funds means that you have the money in the bank today to purchase this property if it's a cash offer. Okay. You've got to submit that with the offer, or your offer goes into the garbage pile. You have to line up good contractors, and this is early on in the process. This is, when you're looking at a property, I'll use the example of the one we're going to look at today that came on the market yesterday. So let's say when you're walking through this process, property comes on the market yesterday, you take a look at it today, and you call up your contractors and you say, hey, Bob, hey, Gil, hey, Sam, this foreclosure came on the market yesterday. I'm looking at it today. Uh, can you meet me out there? Can you drive by? What's your schedule like? How busy are you? So you're going to want to start lining up your contractors before you put pen to paper on writing an offer, because time is money, and all of that stuff. So you're going to want to be proactive about that. All right. um and again, I go into that in the estimating repairs and finding contractors class. um Book a sewer scope and inspection. This is after pen has gone to paper, which I talked about more last week in the due diligence class. Um, Say, hey, I'm writing an offer on this property. What's your schedule look like? Because within writing the offer, you're gonna want to have this thing queued up. You're going to want to talk to your insurance agent. I've got 3 insurance agents listed here that work with members of the group. I can connect you with them, but that's your next call. All right. Property comes on the market yesterday. You're looking at it today. I'm going to call up my insurance guy and say, hey, this came on the market yesterday. I'm looking at it today. I'm considering writing an offer. Get the wheels turning on what my insurance is going to be looking like. All right. Number 10, you're going to have to put down earnest money. And this is not what you offer. Every bank is going to probably counter offer your original offer, and they're going to want a certain amount of earnest money. I've seen banks that want 10% of the purchase price as earnest money. Okay, you need to be prepared for that. You won't know that until you make your offer, but you've got to be prepared. You got to be prepared for a substantial earnest money, to putting a substantial amount of earnest money down. All right. And here's what's going to happen. And here's what typically happens in the process is that the bank is going to assume that you're a real estate investor, which you are. And if your offer is in the name of an LLC or whatever it might be, so they're going to assume that you've done this before. They're going to assume that you've looked at the properties. They may or may not even allow an inspection period. Okay. They're going to say, oh, well, you can go see it before you write an offer. But we're not going to allow an inspection period. Okay. So they're gonna assume you're a savvy investor. They're gonna assume when you do a walkthrough that you know what's wrong with it and that you're pretty much going through with the deal, or you're not gonna even bother writing the offer. So know that your earnest money is at risk. This is different from a typical offer on a typical retail property where you put your earnest money down, but you have the opportunity to go through the contingencies of an inspection, of financing. If you want further, want contractors to come look at it, you can go through all that. And then if you decide you don't want to go through with the deal, you let the seller know and you would get your earnest money back. The banks don't always do that. Or if they do, you know, all of a sudden that paperwork gets pushed to the bottom of their pile. And yeah, you'll get your earnest money back, but you might get it in a week, you might get it in a month, you might get it in 4 months, you might have to fight to get it back. I'm telling you, and people say, well, no, they have to do it. Well, yeah, they have to do it, but there's no timeline that they have to do it in. All right. So you've got to be prepared for that. Know that it's at risk. And what I tell my clients is, prepare for it and prepare for the fact that you might have to fight to get your earnest money back. Meaning what? You might have to hire an attorney and take the bank to court to get your $2,000 or $3,000 back. And guess what? What do you have to pay the attorney to get it back? And then you make your decision. Well, is it worth paying the money for an attorney to get this $3,000 back, or do I just eat it and learn my lesson the hard way? I mean, I'm telling you that happens. It doesn't happen all the time. It doesn't happen often, but it happens often enough that it bears mentioning and bears being prepared for. Here's another thing about foreclosures, all right, is that you will see these on listings in the description is this property is offered under the first look program. And the first look program, again, in my experience, there's supposed to be some rules, but banks don't follow, the rules. Not we're in a world not everybody follows rules anyway. But a first look program means that when a property is put on the market, it doesn't happen with every foreclosure, but it happens with several, where the bank says, well, for the first 7 days, 14 days, 30 days on the market, we will only entertain an offer from a potential owner occupant. So they will not look at an offer from an investor until this time period has has run its course. The reason for that is, in my opinion, it's basically public relations for the bank. That they say, look, we're a good member of the community. We want to help build neighborhoods up, and we want to help people get affordable housing. Therefore, we have this first look program, and so we can pat ourselves on the back that we're doing a good thing for the community. The other reason I think they do it, which is just my editorial opinion, is again, the banks can't stand to see somebody else make money off the deal. So they don't want an investor to come in and make money off the deal. It's my opinion. But that's that. So, but you should be aware of them and when they expire. And a lot of properties will be sold, under that program. So it's a lost opportunity for you. And you're watching it. If you're interested in this deal, you're watching it. You're sitting looking at the clock, watching the clock tick. You know, what are you doing as an investor? Are you just sitting there watching a clock tick, or are you out looking for other deals? Which you should be out always looking for other deals, and don't bank on getting this deal after the first look period. All right. Um, and then number 12 is get out there. I know it's no fun. I'm not thrilled about doing it, but I do it all the time. On December 6th with snow on the ground and 0-degree temperature, of going to look at properties and write offers. But again, you're the CEO of your business. This is actually a great time of year to buy properties. For that reason, is there aren't that many buyers out there. And you think of it, the bank is paying money out of pocket every month, and every day that property sits on the market. They're paying taxes. If you could mute yourself, I'd appreciate it. If they're paying taxes, they're paying insurance, they're paying maintenance, they may or may not be paying utilities, but they have out of pocket, actual real cash money out of pocket expenses every month. And every month it sits, the more money they lose. So theoretically, the more motivated they become. And therefore, as an investor, November, December, January is a good time to buy, because then you can get to work on the properties and put them on the market if you're selling them or renting them. You can get them prepared to rent at the peak cycle of sales or rent. All right, so that's my 12 steps right there. um, Two key documents for every foreclosure transaction are the purchase agreement, which the offer starts with your boilerplate standard purchase agreement that every realtor has and every company has. Real Estate One has a contract, Keller Williams has a contract, Century 21 has a contract, Remax has a contract. The standard purchase agreement that covers all the elements, all right, that's that's just the starting point, okay, that every bank will take and look at. And then what they do, you negotiate back and forth the main terms of price, terms, cash, loan, whether um, you can write in your purchase agreement that you want a 10-day inspection period, and you can write all that in your offer. You can write a $2 earnest money in your offer. You can do any of that you want to do. All right, and then that purchase agreement goes to the bank. Remember what I said about the disclosures. If you get any disclosures, they're not going to be worth the paper they've been written on, because the bank doesn't know anything about the property. All right. But here's where the stuff hits the fan, is that assuming you have an agreement on price and terms, all right, and then all the other ones cascade off that. Assuming you have an agreement on price and terms, the bank is going to say, yeah, okay, we agree to this, but you need to sign this addendum, okay? And uh, it's not just one standard form, as I said in previous slides, and I'll say it again. Every bank, every mortgage company, every entity that owns these properties has their own addendum. And I've seen addendums that are 1 page long, and I've seen addendums, the high water mark, I saw an addendum that was 51 pages long. Okay. And there's really no negotiating. You can go through the 51 pages and you can say, well, I agree to 36 out of the 51 pages, but I don't agree to the others. The bank will say, okay, fine, thank you very much, goodbye. And they're on to the next one, or they'll put it back on the market. So it's not a universal that they won't negotiate, but what I'm telling you is to prepare for the fact that the bank may not be willing to make any negotiations. Because okay, and why is that? You just said, Brian, they're motivated sellers. They want to sell. They hate having it on the books. Yes, that's true, but again, it's a bank entity. Okay, you're not dealing with a corporate entity. You're dealing with someone at the bank, or the listing agent, the selling agent is dealing with a person at the bank whose title is asset manager. Okay. That, okay, that job, in my opinion, is likely the crappiest job at the bank. And the newest people at the bank get that job. So they kind of get weeded through. If you can get through being an asset manager at the bank, well, then, you can get through being a banker. So again, they want to get it off their books, but it's not their money. It's not the asset manager's money. It's not the asset manager who's paying the property taxes and the maintenance every month. It's still the bank. So it's not his or her money. Yeah, the bank is losing money, The asset manager's not losing money. All right. So therefore, they have the leverage to say, well, look, Mr. Buyer, okay, if you don't agree to it, we'll get another buyer. If you're interested enough, that means there's got to be other investors out there interested enough. And again, typically with bank-owned properties, there are multiple offers. That's pretty typical. So you got to navigate that. That's part of my negotiation class. So, but just know that the bank may or may not be willing to negotiate. And again, this gets to, how do you know that? Well, you know that by talking to your buyer's agent, who likely or hopefully has dealt with the listing agent before. Okay. And, as an example, you can hire me and we have the offer. And I did this on my most recent deal with one of the members of this group on a foreclosure that was in Whitmore Lake, where I knew the listing agent. I've done deals with him before. Okay. So I can call him up. I can say, what's the deal on this one? Do you have a relationship with the asset manager? And he might say, oh yeah, I can talk to the guy. He's reasonable. Let's see if we can work this out. Or the listing agent might say, Brian, this bank is crazy. Oh, you've just got to submit a form and they decide things by committee. You can't negotiate, good luck, but we'll do our best, but there's only so much we can do. So that's kind of the gray area of these foreclosures. But again, I emphasize the point, of having a good realtor who's experienced in doing this type of thing. But be prepared that a bank at some point the bank is going to say take it or leave it. Your earnest money might be at risk, or they may, or you may submit everything and then not hear for 3 weeks. All of those frustrations are there in the real world and build up. But again, here's my other key point on the bank addendums. All the bank addendums are different, but they're all the same in that it's 51 pages of the bank covering their ass. So you want your attorney to look at it to protect your interests, all right? And your attorney might say, well, this is what this paragraph means, because that addendum was written by some bank attorney, and I guarantee you that even if you went to law school, you would never be able to decode this stuff. So it's just beware. Have your power team engaged or ready to, queued up to engaged. All right, this is one. I saw this yesterday. I went on the, I ran the hot sheet yesterday. Typically there used to be, back in the market crash and even pre-market crash, there used to be a couple hundred properties in Washtenaw County on the market, foreclosures, at a given time. After the crash happened and after that myth was busted that I told you about, um, you know, the banks the banks are doing a lot more to let people stay in their home and to renegotiate their deals. Okay, because they learned they don't want to be homeowners. So they want to. So hence, fewer foreclosures are on the market. Now, you might read stories or see them online that says, "Oh, there's these big tsunamis of foreclosures coming on." I've read those stories for years, and it never has happened yet. I won't say it never will happen, because anything can happen today or tomorrow. But anyway, long story short, so on the hot list that I look at, there's about 200 and some odd properties. Um, the bulk of them, I mean, I will say the bulk of them on that list are in Detroit, are in Flint, are in Saginaw. I'm not in those markets, so I don't spend that much time studying them or analyzing those deals. I did for fun analyze one yesterday just for giggles. Um, and I do think that in those markets, because there are more of them, And because of the price points, and the conditions are really pretty bad in general, compared to some of these others, um, that, you know, they're priced below market in those markets. I'm going to say in general. I didn't think they were, but I never really looked at it that closely till yesterday. So if you're if you're looking at doing business in Detroit, Flint, Saginaw, I think there are a lot of opportunities there, with a lot more meat on the bone, as they say. So this is a 3 bedroom, 1 bath, 2,400 square feet, good sized property. Where if you look at the pictures, you know, I don't know when those pictures were taken. It's a foreclosure now. I don't know. It looks like someone was living in there, but they may have just walked away. I don't know that story because I didn't find out. I didn't call the listing agent or whatever. But anyway, this is on Valley Drive. This is over near Gulfside and Packard. Um, and it's on the market at 329. So I did a quick little analysis and of comps, and there's a pretty wide range because there's been a lot of activity in that area in the last year, and kind of the net that I cast to look for an ARV is, just as a first pass, I do, everything that's sold, within a mile of this property, within the last year, within 10% of the square footage, yada, yada, yada. Those are the search parameters I use to find the ARV. So the range I found was anything from 200 to about 379 to 380 on the very high side. Okay. So now, as an investor, you really need to learn not to hang your hat on the idea of, oh, if I fix this up, this is going to be worth what the most valuable property that's sold in the last year is worth. Okay. You can do that because you can do whatever you want to do. I would encourage you not to do that. I'm on the conservative side. I want to price an ARV, you know, closer to closer to the real world, which is not it's not what the most expensive one sold for, and it's not what the cheapest one sold for. It's somewhere in the middle. And where in the middle it is going to end up is going to be based on how much you're going to spend, sprucing this thing up. All right. So, long story short, uh, to me, there's not a lot of meat on the bone on this. But again, you have to figure out, as an investor, are you looking at this with the idea of flipping it, or are you looking at it with the idea of turning it into a rental? Okay, I think this would be a good rental property potentially. Okay, so and then you look through the pictures, and there's a lot of clutter in there and stuff like that. I don't know the condition of the main systems, like the roof and the plumbing and the foundation and stuff like that. I don't know any of that yet, but assuming that that's all kind of good and it's kind of cosmetic stuff, all right, this could potentially be, a candidate where I can buy it at market value. Again, it's on the market at 329. If I wrote an offer to, the investor called me up and said, Brian, I want to offer 250 on this. Okay, well, okay, that's nice, but it's been on the market one day. The bank's not going to take a low ball offer after being on the market for one day. All right. It's got to become seasoned, as we say, or it's got to age. You can keep an eye on it. We can write an offer on it. You know, maybe it'll happen. Maybe they'll say, I want this off the books by the end of the month. I'll take, if it's cash and a clean offer, maybe I'll take it. You never know. You got to present the offer. But I'm telling you, realistically, a bank is not going to accept a low ball offer on day one. Okay. It's got to take some time. So anyway, so that's it. And I mean, I just did a first pass analysis. I didn't go see this property. Again, There are pictures online. I'm going to assume that the pictures were taken recently, but you don't know until you know. And even condition has been changed, even if the pictures were taken a week ago. All right. But this is a sample of what's on the market. There's only 4 properties on the market in Washtenaw County that are bank-owned properties out of the 200 some odd. So the pickings are very, very slim in Washtenaw County. There's a couple of them that have been on the market for several months. You know, I don't know why until I do a little bit more research. But there are reasons why. And typically the reasons, why is a bank-owned property on the market after 90 or 120 days is typical. I mean, I can generalize. I don't know for a fact that it's because the bank is not responsive and there's an asset manager sitting on it who thinks the property is worth more than the market will always tell the value of the property. And I always say, the value of the property is not what you say it is or what I say it is. It's what a buyer's willing to pay. That's the market value of the property. So, for whatever reason, no one has spoken to that asset manager before and said, "Hey, Mr. Asset Manager, have you figured out how much money you have spent in the last 180 days that this property's been sitting vacant on the market? Have you figured that out? And have you figured out how much it's going to cost you if it sits for another 180 days?" Okay. Again, that gets into the whole dynamic of the relationship between your buyer's agent, the listing agent, and the listing agent's relationship with the asset manager of the bank. But that's a whole other part of the story. But I put this out there just to show you a sample of what comes on the market and to demonstrate to you that even on the market today, a foreclosure, I don't know how much this owner owes the bank, but this is pretty near what market value is for this property in the condition that it's in. It might be a little bit lower, they put it a little bit lower to attract attention. Okay. But that's typically my experience of, of the market today. Like I say, if you're in different markets, Detroit, Saginaw, Flint, there's a good chance that those properties are, substantially below, what the market value is. So there's theoretically more meat on the bone because there's more properties and the banks are genuinely trying to get investors in there more and fixing up more and more properties in more neighborhoods. So there's more opportunity there if that's the road you want to go down. All right. All right. That's what I've done. I'm 11 minutes over. That's the end of my presentation. All right. Here's some additional websites. YouTube, there's thousands of videos on buying foreclosures, which are more general or different market areas. I think the little bit of difference between mine is my focus is more on Southeast Michigan. Bigger Pockets, Clever Investor. These I haven't, quite frankly, looked at for a long time. I used to use them more regularly, so I don't know how current they are or anything. But if they're out there and there's stuff out there, it's a good resource to learn from. Foreclosure.com, freeforeclosure.com. I'm sure they have forums and tutorials and all kinds of other resources on there, paid or free, whatever it might be. But these are good resources and websites for you for general reference for resources. These are, I talk about the group's Bible, which is this group, or this book, excuse me. There's also a couple other books in this series, the Gary Keller series. There's a book called Flip. There's a book called Hold. You can look those up. I encourage you to buy yourself a Christmas present for the whole library of these. And read 10 pages a day. Do one thing every day to advance your real estate learning career. 2 upcoming events. If I must say, we had a really great session the other day on AI for real estate investors. There were very fortunate. I know a little bit about it. I know just about enough to be dangerous, but there were guys at the table who know. I mean, my head was spinning at all the stuff they know about AI, what's coming down the pike with AI, what you can do with AI. And we had a great discussion. That's all I can tell you. I'm going to do those on a regular basis because AI is an absolute game changer for real estate. And I've never used that term but in the 20 years, but that I'm doing. The Rainmakers is in person, wholesaling on January 3rd. I can't believe we're into 2026 already. That's going to be on Zoom. It's a Saturday morning. Um, Next steps. I always encourage you when you come to a class, when you come to a meeting, whether it's my meeting or any meeting, you know, have a goal coming in and have an action item coming out. Otherwise, the meeting has no value and you ask for the last hour of your time back. You got to initiate that. You got to be proactive about it. Next steps, get engaged with the group. Like I say, we had a meeting on Thursday. You know, everybody at every meet, I've done hundreds of these meetings. When you go physically face to face to a meeting, everybody at that meeting knows something that you don't know, and you know something that they don't know. That's what makes the going in person valuable. You might say, oh, it's the weather's bad, or I can't make it, or I'm too tired, or whatever. I'm more and more energized. I've been doing this for a lot of years, and I get more and more energized by meeting people in person, engaging people. All right, learning from them, teaching from them, helping them, letting them help you. I can go on and on and on about that. Make a commitment to yourself, and I'm going to say, small bites. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Learn one thing every day. Do one thing every day in your real estate business. And guess what? A year from now, we might be sitting on a Zoom call. And if you've done one thing every day, that means you will have done 365 things between now and then. How far advanced will your real estate investing career be if you've done after you've done 365 things? Um, I'd love to have coffee. My coffee calendar is getting booked up. I'd love to have coffee with you, sit with you. It could be on Zoom or in person, to talk about what you want to do and how I can help you. That's why I do this stuff. Um, Again, about the group, if you're a first time caller today, um, laser classes, I'm recording them as I go. So if you miss them, you can see the recording. Um, the Rainmakers team, I just talked about coaching, deal making. You have a power team. You engage with the group. You got a plug and play power team. We have realtors. We have other investors. We have contractors. We had like 3 lenders at the table the other day. A couple realtors, contractors. We had 2 contractors at the table the other day. Other investors willing to share their experience, willing to potentially partner with you on deals when you're not experienced. Because the folks in my group, they remember the time when they were novices, and they know how important it is, to pay it forward to help somebody after somebody helped you. Yeah, that's it. Um, if you get engaged with the group, and if you find value in the group and in what I do, I ask for a one-time membership fee of $150. It's a one-time lifetime membership. It kind of demonstrates a commitment to yourself, and it demonstrates a bit of an appreciation, um, for what I do. So it would be appreciated if you want to do that. I'm not going to chase people down. I'm not going to kick anybody out. If you want to come, come. If you want to watch the videos, watch the videos. But if you're going to be engaged with a group, I think you'll find it's a small investment. And that's it. So I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to stop the record. All right.